Arizona's up to number 4 in the AP poll 2 weeks into the season, and they're nowhere close to their ceiling.
You are Locked On Wildcats, your daily podcast on the Arizona Wildcats. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network around. I'm your host, Leif Thulin, your resident college basketball guru, stats nerd, point guard by game, and ball knower by trade. I'm excited to talk Arizona hoops with you today. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So download the app today. Today on the show, I've got a doozy for you. I'll discuss what's gotten Arizona to being ranked 4th in the country, preview the battle with UConn, familiarizing you guys with the Huskies, and outlining keys to the game. So let's dive in with your beloved Arizona Wildcats. Arizona's number 4 in the AP poll, and deservedly so. 5th in the coaches poll, and I would say clearly has the best resume in college basketball, with 2 neutral site wins over teams that entered the season ranked within the top 15. And we're ranked higher than Arizona to begin the season. What has gotten Arizona to this juncture and winning those 2 marquee games is what is so exciting to me. They've won in completely diametrically opposed fashions against Florida and the way they beat UCLA. And that has me even more bullish about what Arizona basketball can accomplish than I was entering the season. And in my first show, for those of you who've been here all along, thank you. I said this team should be thinking about the Final Four due to talent level, and my expectation was a top 2 seed. So I'm even more bullish than that now. The top 8 of this team, the rotation, rivals any team in the country. And the complementary nature that has already been demonstrated, but also the growth potential of this team. So what I mean by complementary nature is how this team fits together. The jigsaw puzzle of, okay, this person's got an allocated role doing this person's got an allocated role doing this, and they can step up when one's not coming up short in some department and another's doing better than the other. The way that they build around one another and can compete even without the best from all of their players at the same time has me very, very optimistic. I mean, I think many of the future stars of the Wildcats haven't played like that. Braden Burries being one that has not played well yet, and Arizona's up to 4 in the country. If I told you that before the season, you'd be pretty shocked. So I'm extremely optimistic about the future. Quickly to remind the everydayers and enlighten the newcomers, I believe Arizona will be ranked number 1 by January, starting 11-2 or better in non-conference, opening up conference play 7-0. That would be 18-2 or better with wins over UCLA, Florida, Auburn, potentially Bama, so potentially San Diego State, and maybe UConn. But at least some combo of that over the 6 really good teams there, going 4-2 or 5-1, when the math and prognostications from many public sites said 2-4 in those 6 games, 3-3 at the best. The game that I've repeatedly, since the very beginning, before the season started, said is the most difficult is the one that's coming up. It's Arizona venturing across the country to Storrs, Connecticut, to play a true road game on campus against the 3rd-ranked Connecticut Huskies. So that's the scene that we'll set, and we'll discuss this game in detail both at the end of this episode and coming up on Wednesday morning before the game. But now it's time to elaborate on what has impressed me more than anything in a 4-0 start that I guaranteed would happen, being a lower on Florida and being lower on UCLA and being higher on Arizona than others. It's been the diversity of how Arizona has won the games, the resilience demonstrated by a young core, and the poise and maturity of the veterans who've assumed roles and performed admirably in their role and have also starred in their roles when necessary. Against Florida, Arizona trailed by 12 with 10 minutes into the game. And they were rattled. They were sped up. A lot of things were going willy-nilly. And by half, they led. Against UCLA in Inglewood, this one was more or less a road game. Arizona trailed by 10, 15-5 before the game really got going. They were 1 of 9 from the field with numerous turnovers. And you felt like, okay, this is as bad a start as possible, yet Arizona led at half while shooting just 36% from the field and playing a game at a snail's pace, which is conducive to UCLA success and not conducive to success for the Arizona Wildcats. The point that I'm making here is that the best teams in the country can win in track meets, or they can win in rock fights. And you can also win without an All-American playing like an All-American on any given night. Players have off nights, but the ones that can win it all are not solely reliant on one player being an All-American every single night and being a first-team All-American every single night to have a chance. Because Arizona's far more than that. They're not solely reliant on Koa Peat. They're not solely reliant on Koa Peat or Jaden Bradley. They have got a lot of guys, and not all of them are playing well yet, and that is actually a good thing. Arizona passes all those checkpoints. So now check this. Arizona against Florida, the Wildcats scored 93 points by only shooting 5 threes. They went 2 of 5 in that, and then they rode the hot hand of Koa Peat, getting 57 from their best two players. Jaden Bradley added 27 to Koa's 30. Then they scored 56 points from the 2-point range, 50 of which were inside the paint. And that was against an enormous team who stubbornly, because that's what they do, choose to go man-to-man because their front line is really good. And they want to go mano-to-mano. And said no help on the interior of that game. And they had over 80 possessions, well over the average of the highest team in the country, because that game was exceedingly fast, which played into both teams' hands, and Arizona was better at it. But in that game, Arizona didn't get that much from the ancillary pieces. They didn't get that much production from Braden Burries. They didn't get anything from Dwayne Aristode. Delorsa was okay in that game. Ivan Karchenkov stepped up, and it took that to win. They had 3 players play well, and I would say Tobe Awaka was okay. He got in foul trouble. Krivas was okay, but protected the rim well. Then against UCLA, Arizona trailed in a game at numerous junctures, but in a game where points would be hard to come by. So you'd expect you really need a All-American performance, at least from Koa Peat or Jaden Bradley. Well, Koa Peat was saddled with foul trouble, had 6 turnovers, only 2 field goals the whole game, and their second-best player, Jaden Bradley, by half only had 2 points, 1 field goal. And so that's a game you lose, right? Nope, they're up at half. This team, by virtue of their veterans stepping up, like Anthony Delorso was monumental in that first half, scoring 13 against Mick Cronin's Bruins, and Mo Krivas loomed large on both sides of the ball, especially on the interior defensively, at many points of this game. That's complementary basketball. Players stepping up and starring in their roles when their stars are not playing particularly well. And then you look at, you then look at a game that is won defensively versus a game that's won offensively. That's where these games diametrically oppose one another. Arizona won the game defensively at the end of the game, showing they can play effectively in multiple styles, but also defensively they employed different schemes. They won the game by playing a switching defense and having Tobe Awaka sit in a stance. Earlier in the game, they played a high hedge, and earlier in the game before that, they played a big-time drop coverage, and they were able to adapt. So they're not rigid in what works for them, and if they're beaten at that, so be it. They beat us in our style. Like, Arizona is willing to adapt, and Tommy Lloyd has been criticized for lack of adaptation in the March Madness. And I think the talented personnel is there, but the adaptation is also getting there because Tommy Lloyd's getting better as a coach as these players are also getting better. And that brings me to my last point. Arizona has 4 freshmen, and one of whom has All-American capabilities. And he wasn't very good in that game, just playing simple, but he was fantastic in the other game. And so you typically, if you have a guy that carries that much of a workload, he has to be at least decent for you to beat his ranked team. And he was not that. And then you look at Braden Burries. He's not played well. Karchenkov had a good start against Florida, but since hasn't found water from a boat. And Dwayne Aristode has had one really good game and was a non-factor in the other 3. Karchenkov, Burries, Aristode, streaky, inconsistent, but honestly consistently not factoring into the game very much. And Peat played 2 games that were the bye games with his foot off the pedal. One game where he looks like the best player in the country, and the other game he looks sped up. So there's a lot of room for 4 of the 8 rotational pieces to get a lot better, and I assure you they'll continuously make strides. And Arizona's already ranked 4th in the country. Like, that's why I'm so bullish on this team. Coming up next, I'm going to give you some thoughts on Arizona, a little more of a deep dive as to my expectations for the Wildcats, but also expectations for Arizona against UConn coming your way next. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next on fourth quarter comebacks or whatever you may like. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you guys for making Locked On Wildcats your first listen of the day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. I'm Leif Thulin, and I've explained to you guys on Locked On Wildcats why I believe so highly in Tommy Lloyd in Arizona, and will continue to do so here. I mentioned that I don't think they're close to their ceiling, and I'll further elaborate on that before diving into the Connecticut Huskies. I still think when all is said and done, Arizona will be a better offensive team than defensive. And that's just Tommy Lloyd's nature. They've been a top 20 team every year, and more of the years than not, they've been a top 10 team offensively. And they've been top 15 each and every year offensively. So that's almost a given 4 years in. They got plenty of good personnel. And I still think they'll play quite quickly and take high percentage chances because that's where their bread is buttered, near the basket. And they're very good at getting there. They play quickly. They generate easy looks both in the half court and in transition. And they'll control the glass against just about anyone. And so far, they've done that in their 2 games. They have a ways to go in terms of accomplishing that level that I think they're actually going to be capable of achieving. But finding a way to win some of these games, finding a way to accomplish what they've done so far, which is having the best resume in college basketball and not be ranked as highly as I think they will be in some of these categories, and having room to grow individually for 4 of their 8 players being freshmen, to me, that means that they'll end up moving up those rankings individually. But also, the other thing that factors against Arizona in terms of efficiency rankings is they haven't played chumps. They've played 2 really good teams. And you look at the efficiency of a team that's beating up on poor teams, then their efficiency is going to be better. So I think that hurts Arizona now. And the way you really evaluate is since day one in episode 1 on this show, and thank you guys for tuning in to those, and of course tuning in now on Locked On Wildcats. But the everydayers know I've been consistent on this thought. I did scouting this summer, deep dives into Arizona, crunched numbers, and outlined my formula for Arizona. And upon doing the numbers and the roster analysis for what I thought would be a rotation, the points per game projections, everything, these are my projections for the entire team. This is a top 2 seed due to a top 15 offense. My guess would be top 10 again. Top 15 rebounding margin of high major schools. Top 20 pace and top 25 defense. Here's where they lie right now. And this is having played 2 real deal opponents, and many teams have not. Arizona's 13th on offense, 12th on defense, which is well ahead of schedule. And I think that actually moves up their ceiling quite a lot. 57th in tempo, thanks to UCLA and NAU. And NAU is basically a practice game for UCLA. And I think Arizona was intentional about how they scheduled that and knew NAU would play slowly. And so they ended up changing their tempo, both in the metrics, but also in terms of stylistics in those 2 games. And then rebounding is hard to judge at this point until conference play when all teams face the same level of competition that they're used to, because Arizona is not in the top 50 in rebounding, but I assure you they will be. Arizona's 4th in the poll, and I think they have a chance to be number 1 by Monday next week. Here's what you need to know about UConn. And speaking of the formula, like I said, the formula for Arizona is exactly what I just outlined there, in my opinion. Coach of UConn, Danny Hurley, has been quoted saying he has a formula. And after saying that, he says, like, I got it now. I got a formula. They won 2 titles in a row. Last year, they were an 8 seed, and this year, they look more like a title team than the 8 seed. UConn just beat BYU in a neutral site game. Granted, it was in the East, basically a home game. But here's their recipe, and I see them as elite this year after being rightfully skeptical of them last year. They have a point guard who is good this year. And that matters a lot in general, but it also very much matters for what UConn had compared to last year, where they really struggled at the point guard spot after having an All-American there the year before. Last year, they were preseason number 2, and I had them 10. And it's basically the same thing I said about Florida. They retained a little which is why they get votes, but they lost a ton from championship teams. And they rode reputation to be seated where they were. Florida was not the third best team in the country coming into this year. They were about 15th. But because they retained a front court, despite losing their best player and, their 1,000-point scorers in the backcourt, they were ranked highly, and Arizona beat them and perpetuated themselves into the top 5 after doing so. But UConn this year retained all 3 All Big East performers from a season ago, brought in Silas Demary, who will be All Big East this season, and he allows them the threat of a point guard to attack the rim, score, shoot, and also rebound and facilitate. Last year, they could only get like 2 of those 4. UConn runs super elaborate sets on offense and have ridden the emergence of veteran big man Tarris Reed, who transferred from Michigan last year, was kind of splitting time with Samson Johnson. And now Danny Hurley mentioned that Tarris Reed's only about 80% prior to playing BYU. So that is actually good for Arizona, knowing that he's limited, but he's been very effective so far. Reed, if you're to look at those old UConn teams, for those of you who really know the rosters, he resembles the Adama Sanogo, a kind of a bull in a china shop from the 2023 title team that relied on him as an offensive hub, with Jordan Hawkins and Alex Karaban spacing around him. Karaban is still Alex Karaban, this time a senior as opposed to a freshman. But like I've said for years about Alex Karaban, he's more suited to be a 4th option as opposed to a star, which he was asked to be last year. He got elevated up the scouting report and did not shine in that. Actually had career lows shooting the ball and did not cater well and handle the responsibility of being a star. Then there's Solo Ball, who's asked to be a 3-point gunner who can score 15 a game like he did last year, and so far hasn't found a shooting stroke, which is scary because he can really light it up, and he's essentially their Jordan Hawkins. Then there's Silas Demary, who's a transfer from Georgia, scored 13 a game last year on a tournament team. He resembles Tristan Newton, a big guard that can pressure the rim, rebound, defend, and shoot. UConn has the horses to shoot really well, as well as score on the inside, and that makes them very dangerous because they have fantastic execution. This year, they have the horses and the execution. Last year, they just had the execution without the horses. Their Ken Palm analytics say they're the 6th best offense, 15th best defense, and play the 248th fastest pace, which would fit my eye test. I would tell you they're a better offensive team than defensive team. I would say that about Arizona, and I guess technically I'm wrong on that, 12th and 13th. But these two teams are stylistically different in terms of pace and meticulousness on offense, but similar in terms of what their strengths are. Arizona does play more quickly, and I would say is more dominant on the interior, but I have a statistic that's going to point out that UConn's pretty good near the rim. Ken Palm, if we're staying on them, UConn's supposed to win 82-77 against Arizona in Stores and Gamble Pavilion in a true on-campus road game. And that really does matter. I think the cross-country travel makes me as wary as anything. And I projected this as the only loss in non-conference to Arizona before the season because the size is comparable and the meticulousness and execution of UConn's offense concerns me in terms of how they divert attention from what they're doing on their sets and makes a young defense with a ton of freshmen playing big minutes really have to be aware and cognizant of the scout. And I think Koa Peat's very intelligent. I think Braden Burry's very intelligent. They're going to play big minutes. Karchenkov's played pro basketball, but it's hard to defend UConn. And they make people look silly. And then they also slow pace by doing that. I will say I think Koa Peat should feast against Alex Karaban. Like the 4-man matchup's interesting, but I think Koa Peat should have his way. And Hurley's going to see what Mick Cronin did and certainly stunt and ask the perimeter of Arizona to hit threes to stay on pace. That's definitely a key to see if Arizona can knock down threes to complement the interior presence of Peat, Krivas, and Awaka. That'll be a key all season long. It's a recurring theme. But coming up next, I'll outline my keys for Arizona to defeat UConn and lay claim to number 1 in the country. Thank you guys for making Locked On Wildcats your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the number 1 sports podcast network around. We really appreciate it. And I certainly appreciate you guys for tuning into Locked On Wildcats. Leif Thulin with you here. And here are the keys for beating UConn. And we'll delve into these ideas in further detail tomorrow when previewing game day against the Huskies. First things first, you got to win the glass. And, that's something I'm going to say a lot. But they've done that against Florida. They've done that against UCLA, and I think it's an enormous reason they won both those games. Against Florida, Arizona won the glass by 2, And against Florida, they won the glass by 2. And in that game against Florida, Florida was able to pad those offensive rebound stats and make it so they had more rebounds than it felt like towards the end of the game due to a couple missed bunnies and desperation time. I felt like through the 30 minutes of the game where Arizona dictated, they out-rebounded by more than that, and also they got a few runouts. Against UCLA, Arizona was projected to win the glass. They won the glass by 7. And I will say, however, in those games, Arizona won the glass and therefore had more chances, but also scored well in transition against Florida and had enough against UCLA of easy, uncontested baskets that made it a win in terms of achieving the keys. They didn't win those by a ton because they didn't win either of those games by a ton, but they did win it, and that's why they won. UConn's big, but they're not enormous. Tarris Reed's a really good rebounder. Ryba's a center off the bench. Karaban's not a huge 4, though. Reed can really rebound, though. UConn averages about 37 rebounds per game, which isn't amazing considering they've played against 3 cupcakes and 1 good team, and they were -1 against that 1 good team without BYU starting setter Keba Keita playing the majority of the game. That said, UConn was bleeding big in that game for much of it. So my key number 1 would be win the glass by 5 or more and score 20 or more points greater than UConn does with points in the paint plus free throws, because UConn is probably going to shoot more threes than Arizona. They're a 3-point shooting team. They shoot it well. So Arizona must control and assert themselves in the paint area. So let me reiterate. I expect Arizona to score about 45 points in the paint with 15 free throws. And if that happens, that means that's 60 points. Ideally, UConn's kept under 40 points in the paint plus free throws. And I think that's an ambitious goal, but it's doable considering the diet that Arizona was able to achieve against Florida, playing very, very aggressively on the interior. The next key is be competitive in threes made. Those two playing hand in hand, because should UConn shoot fewer 2s and Arizona dominate on the interior, that means Arizona shoots the fewer 3s and UConn probably shoots more. So I also think that's important because Mo Krivas should limit Reed on the interior, and then Arizona doesn't need to double as much. So maybe there is fewer wide open 3s, but Arizona is going to get caught on the screen actions at some point, and UConn's going to shoot a lot of 3s, and they've been able to blow teams out over the last couple of years because they get hot from 3 and then front run. UConn scores over 50% of their points from 2, much like Arizona, and they shoot 65%. And what that means is they make a ton of their relatively few attempts from 2. UConn will have a less easy chance to make all those baskets from the interior from Reed and others slashing because Mo Krivas should be patrolling the paint. But I also think that makes them more liable to shoot more 3s and potentially even more dangerous, because I don't think Arizona's going to need to double. A goal in this one, I guess, for Arizona would be within 15 points, meaning 5 3s from 3. And ideally, you're under double digits, meaning you lose by 3 3s or fewer in terms of the discrepancy of made 3s. And both teams actually shoot very similarly, 40% from deep. 2 more keys. One of them I think is particularly vital for Koa Peat, and it's must stay out of foul trouble, especially for Krivas and Peat, because they're massive mismatches. Peat on offense and Krivas on defense. I think UConn will be very wise to go at Mo Krivas and try to get him in out of the game so they can open up their offensive prowess in the interior where they shoot 65%. I laid out the stats for you guys yesterday. Mo Krivas limited UCLA to like 28% from the paint. And when he was out of the game, UCLA shot 83% from the paint. So I expect an intensity to what UConn runs to try to target those two and get them into foul trouble. And Mo Krivas should really watch some Ryan Kalkbrenner film to learn to never foul, because he is so valuable on the court, just like Ryan Kalkbrenner was. The last key is actually where I see the game decided. This is the most important one, and we're going to talk about this a lot tomorrow. The question is, which supporting cast members for Arizona, that means Anthony Del Orso, Braden Burries, Dwayne Aristote, Ivan Karchenkov, and for UConn, that's Jaden Ross, Eric Ryba, Malachi Smith, and Jalen Stewart. Which of those 4 for each team, which of those quartet can contribute the most to winning by locking up a crucial player on defense, knocking down the open shots they're given, generated by the stars, getting a ton of attention, and the scout will try to take the ball out of their hands. So who can step up and hit shots that are necessary, or who can step up and have 10 rebounds like Ivan Karchenkov did against Florida. For further insights and elaborations of score predictions of this game, I'll be back tomorrow, and I'm going to do a little film study on UConn, think about the game some more, and come up with a real projection. I'm super excited for this one. It's two of the best basketball programs in the country clashing in a true road game. Can't wait. Arizona's got a true chance to be number one. And if they win at UConn, they better be number one in the poll. So let's hope that happens. Thanks for tuning in. Go Wildcats. And thank you guys for making Locked On Wildcats your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On Big 12. Drake Toll breaks down the most exciting conference in college sports, from the rivalries to the championships and everywhere and every game in between. Find Locked On Big 12 on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.